There are moments in television that don't just entertain, they detonate. And right now, one name is at the center of a cultural flashpoint that has millions of Americans arguing, analyzing, and questioning what they just watched. Sydney Sweeney, one of Hollywood's fastest rising stars, has ignited a storm of controversy following the latest episode of Euphoria. But it's not just the performance. It's not just the storyline. It's the comparison that nobody saw coming, and now nobody can ignore. Across social media, fans are drawing parallels between Sweeney's character and a name that has resurfaced with intensity, Erika Kirk. The reactions? Explosive. Some are calling it bold, fearless storytelling. Others are questioning whether the show crossed a line. And in the middle of it all is a performance that may redefine Sydney Sweeney's career, one that critics say is either award-worthy or deeply troubling. Tonight, we're breaking down everything. What happened in the episode, why the comparison is trending, how fans are reacting, and what this means for the future of one of television's most controversial series. Because this isn't just about a TV show anymore. This is about culture, perception, and the power of storytelling in America today. To understand why this moment is resonating so intensely, you have to understand the phenomenon that is Euphoria. Since its debut on HBO, the series has carved out a space unlike anything else on television. Raw, unfiltered, and often uncomfortable. Created by Sam Levinson, the show dives deep into the lives of teenagers navigating addiction, identity, trauma, and relationships in a hyper-stylized, emotionally charged world. At the heart of that world is Cassie Howard, portrayed by Sydney Sweeney. Cassie's journey has never been easy. From her struggles with self-worth to her complicated relationships, she has consistently embodied vulnerability in a way that resonates and sometimes unsettles audiences. Sydney Sweeney herself has become one of the defining faces of a new generation of actors. With roles in critically acclaimed projects and a rapidly growing fan base, she represents both mainstream appeal and artistic ambition. But with that visibility comes scrutiny. Every performance, every scene, every narrative choice is dissected, not just by critics, but by millions of viewers online. And that's where this latest episode changes everything. Because this time, the conversation isn't just about Cassie. It's about what or who she represents. The comparison to Erika Kirk didn't emerge in a vacuum. While details around the figure being referenced vary across online discussions, the name has become shorthand in certain communities for a specific kind of narrative, one that blends vulnerability, controversy, and moral ambiguity. Whether that comparison is accurate or fair is now at the center of a growing debate. So what exactly happened in the episode that sparked this firestorm? Without veering into speculation, here's what we know based on what aired and what has been publicly discussed. The latest episode of Euphoria features a series of emotionally intense scenes centered around Cassie Howard. The storyline pushes her character into territory that many viewers found shocking, not necessarily because it was unprecedented for the show, but because of how far it went in exploring her emotional and psychological state. According to viewers and critics, the episode depicts Cassie in a moment of extreme vulnerability, navigating complex dynamics that blur the lines between agency and influence. It's a portrayal that some are calling brutally honest, while others argue it risks sensationalizing trauma. Almost immediately after the episode aired, social media platforms lit up. Clips began circulating. Hashtags started trending. And then, the comparison surfaced. Users began referencing Erika Kirk, drawing parallels between the character's arc and broader narratives associated with that name. It wasn't a coordinated movement. It was organic, messy, and rapidly evolving. Within hours, the conversation had escalated from niche forums to mainstream platforms. Importantly, there has been no official confirmation from the show's creators linking the character or storyline to Erika Kirk. Any connection being made is coming from viewers and commentators, not from verified production sources. Sydney Sweeney herself has not publicly addressed the comparison at the time of this reporting, nor has HBO released a statement specifically responding to the online discourse. But silence hasn't slowed the conversation. If anything, it's intensified it to understand the implications of this moment. We have to look beyond the surface and examine it through multiple lenses. From a storytelling perspective, Euphoria has always pushed boundaries. Media analysts point out that the show's willingness to explore uncomfortable themes is part of what has made it both critically acclaimed and deeply polarizing. But there's a fine line between exploration and exploitation, and critics argue that this episode walks directly along that edge. From a cultural standpoint, the comparison to Erika Kirk reflects something deeper about how audiences interpret media. In the age of social platforms, viewers are not passive consumers. They are active participants in shaping narratives. When a comparison like this gains traction, it becomes part of the story, regardless of the creator's intent. There's also a reputational dimension for Sweeney. Industry experts note that actors in roles like Cassie often face a unique challenge. Their performances can become so closely associated with controversial storylines that it influences public perception of them personally. That doesn't mean it will harm her career. In fact, many argue it could elevate her status as a serious dramatic actor, but it does mean increased scrutiny. Legally, there's no indication of any issues tied to the comparison itself. However, media lawyers often caution that when real or semi-real figures are invoked in public discourse, it can create a complex environment, especially if misinformation begins to spread. If you want to understand the scale of this moment, you have to look at the digital landscape. Within hours of the episode airing, platforms like X, TikTok, and Reddit were flooded with reactions. Some viewers praised Sweeney's performance as one of the most powerful of her career, calling it fearless, devastating, and unforgettable. Others were far more critical, arguing that the storyline crossed a line and that the comparison to Erika Kirk highlighted deeper concerns about the show's direction. The divide is stark. On one side, you have fans who believe Euphoria is doing exactly what it set out to do, forcing audiences to confront uncomfortable realities. On the other, you have viewers who feel the show is leaning too heavily into shock value at the expense of responsible storytelling. And then there are those caught in the middle, viewers who are both impressed and unsettled, unsure how to reconcile the performance with the implications of the narrative. What's clear is that this isn't a quiet debate. It's loud, it's emotional, and it's spreading. So where does this go from here? For Euphoria, the immediate impact is clear: increased attention. Whether that translates into sustained viewership will depend on how the show navigates the fallout. Future episodes will likely be scrutinized even more closely, with audiences watching for how the storyline evolves. For Sweeney, this moment could be pivotal. Actors often have defining roles, performances that shift how they're perceived in the industry. This could be one of those moments. If the response leans positive, it could solidify her as one of the most compelling actors of her generation. If the controversy dominates, it could complicate that narrative. For the broader television landscape, this situation underscores a growing reality. Audiences are more engaged and more critical than ever before. Shows are no longer just judged by what they present, but by how they are interpreted and discussed. At its core, this story isn't just about a TV show or a viral comparison. It's about connection, how people see themselves in the characters they watch, and how those portrayals can impact real emotions. For some viewers, Cassie's journey feels painfully real. It reflects struggles with identity, validation, and self-worth that resonate deeply. For others, it's a reminder of how media can shape perceptions in ways that aren't always constructive. And for Sweeney, it's a reminder of the weight that comes with telling these stories. Acting isn't just performance. It's interpretation, responsibility, and sometimes controversy. Now we want to hear from you. Did this episode push boundaries in a meaningful way, or did it go too far? Do you think the comparison to Erika Kirk is fair, or is it a stretch driven by online speculation? Join the conversation. Share your perspective in the comments, because this is one of those moments where every viewpoint adds to the bigger picture. And if you want more deep, fact-based breakdowns of the stories everyone in America is talking about, from entertainment to culture to the issues shaping our world, make sure you subscribe and stay with us. Because in today's media landscape, understanding the story is just the beginning. What's unfolding right now didn't begin with a single episode. It didn't even begin this season. To understand why this moment has hit such a nerve across the United States, you have to trace the evolution of both the character and the cultural environment surrounding her. From the very beginning of Euphoria, the show has walked a tightrope between art and provocation. Its storytelling isn't subtle. It's immersive, stylized, and often intentionally uncomfortable. That creative approach, led by Sam Levinson, has consistently sparked debate about where realism ends and dramatization begins. And nowhere is that tension more visible than in the arc of Cassie Howard. Cassie started as a character many viewers sympathized with, a young woman searching for validation in a world that often reduces her to appearance and desirability. But over time, her storyline has become increasingly complex and increasingly controversial. Each season has peeled back another layer, exposing not just her vulnerabilities, but the consequences of those vulnerabilities when they collide with toxic environments. By the time this latest episode aired, Cassie was no longer just a sympathetic figure. She had become something else entirely, a lightning rod. And that transformation matters, because television doesn't exist in isolation. It reflects and influences the cultural moment it's part of. Right now in America, conversations around identity, agency, power dynamics, and representation are more intense than ever. Audiences are more aware, more critical, and more vocal. So when a character like Cassie is pushed into darker, more ambiguous territory, it doesn't just register as entertainment. It becomes part of a much larger conversation. That's the environment in which the Erika Kirk comparison emerged. Now, it's important to be clear, the name Erika Kirk is not officially tied to the show. There's no verified statement from the creators, no confirmed inspiration. What we're seeing is a phenomenon driven entirely by audience interpretation. But in today's media ecosystem, interpretation can be just as powerful as intent. Let's slow this down and walk through exactly how this escalated, because the speed of it is part of what makes this story so significant. The episode airs. Within minutes, early viewers begin posting reactions. Not unusual for a show like Euphoria, which has built a reputation for must-watch live moments. But this time, the tone feels different. There's a sharper edge to the reactions. Less about surprise, more about discomfort. Clips begin circulating. Short excerpts from the episode, particularly emotionally charged scenes involving Cassie, are uploaded and shared across platforms. These clips, often stripped of full context, start gaining traction. Then the commentary begins to shift. Instead of focusing solely on the performance, users begin drawing comparisons. Some are subtle, others are explicit. And gradually the name Erika Kirk. At the center of this moment are questions that go far beyond a single episode of television. Media psychologists point to something called projective interpretation, the idea that audiences often project real-world frameworks onto fictional narratives as a way of making sense of them. In other words, when viewers see something that feels familiar or unsettling, they instinctively connect it to existing references. That appears to be exactly what's happening here. But there's another layer, the role of virality. In the past, controversial moments in television would unfold over days, even weeks. Critics would publish reviews, audiences would discuss, and the conversation would evolve gradually. Now, it happens instantly. A single comparison, accurate or not, can be amplified to millions of people within hours. And once it reaches that scale, it's no longer just a discussion. It's a narrative. For Sweeney, that creates a uniquely challenging position. On one hand, her performance is being widely recognized for its intensity and emotional depth. On the other, it's being pulled into a conversation that she may have had no role in shaping. Industry insiders note that this is one of the defining challenges of modern fame. Actors are no longer just evaluated on their work. They're evaluated on how that work is interpreted, reframed, and sometimes distorted in the public sphere. And then there's the question of responsibility. Should creators anticipate these kinds of interpretations? Should they adjust their storytelling to avoid them? Or is it the audience's responsibility to engage critically with what they're watching? There's no clear answer. But the debate itself is telling. Spend just a few minutes scrolling through social media, and you'll see something striking. This isn't a one-sided reaction. It's a battlefield of perspectives. One group of viewers is defending the episode passionately. They argue that Euphoria has always been about confronting harsh realities, and that discomfort is part of the point. To them, the comparison to Erika Kirk is not only inaccurate, it's a distraction from the artistry of the performance. Another group sees it very differently. They argue that the comparison highlights a deeper issue, that the show may be crossing into territory that feels less like storytelling and more like provocation. For these viewers, the discomfort isn't just emotional, it's ethical. And then there's a third group, arguably the most interesting. These are viewers who are conflicted. They acknowledge the power of Sweeney's performance. They recognize the show's artistic ambition. But they're also unsettled by what they saw, and by how it's being interpreted. This middle ground is where the conversation becomes most nuanced and most revealing, because it reflects something broader about how Americans are engaging with media today. They're not just asking, was it good? They're asking, what does it mean? Moments like this don't just fade away. They leave a mark. For Euphoria, this could represent a turning point in how the show is perceived. It's no longer just a critically acclaimed drama. It's a cultural lightning rod operating in a space where every narrative choice is scrutinized in real time. Future episodes will likely be watched through a different lens. Viewers will be looking not just for story progression, but for how the show responds, directly or indirectly, to the controversy. For Sweeney, the stakes are equally high. This is the kind of moment that can define a career, not in terms of success or failure, but in terms of identity. Is she seen as an actor willing to take risks and push boundaries? Or does the controversy overshadow the craft? History suggests that actors who navigate these moments successfully often emerge stronger, but it's never guaranteed. And then there's the broader industry impact. Other creators are watching this closely. Networks are watching. Because this isn't just about one show, it's about the evolving relationship between content, audience, and interpretation in the digital age. Strip away the headlines, the hashtags, the debates, and what you're left with is something deeply human. At its core, this story resonates because it touches on themes that are universally understood: vulnerability, identity, the search for validation, and the consequences of emotional decisions. For many viewers, Cassie's journey isn't just fictional. It reflects real experiences, real struggles that don't always have clear answers. That's why the reaction is so intense. Because when people see parts of themselves in a character, the way that character is portrayed matters. It can feel validating, or it can feel unsettling. And when that portrayal becomes controversial, it doesn't just spark debate. It sparks emotion. This is one of those moments where there isn't a single right interpretation, and that's exactly why it matters. So now it's your turn. Do you think this episode represents bold, necessary storytelling? Or do you believe it crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed? And what about the Erika Kirk comparison? Does it add insight to the conversation, or does it distort what the show is trying to say? Join the discussion below. Your perspective is part of this story. And if you want more deep, investigative breakdowns that go beyond the surface, stories that don't just tell you what happened, but help you understand why it matters, make sure you stay connected. Because this conversation, it's far from over.